What if your entire future, status, power, even your life, was decided by one silent walk through a candlelit corridor? As the sun disappears behind the golden domes of Topkapi Palace, a different kind of day begins. The outside world believes the palace sleeps, but inside, the harem awakens, behind those velvet-covered doors, where silk drapes whisper secrets and shadows stretch long across mosaic floors. A ritual begins. A ritual no man was allowed to witness. A ritual where women were not just beautiful, they were strategic, dangerous, and sometimes absolutely ruthless. This was not simply about seduction. This was politics, survival, bloodlines. Each night, one woman was chosen. She would be bathed in rose water, her skin dusted with rare perfumes from the East, her body wrapped in fabrics worth more than a soldier's lifetime wage. And then, barefoot, silent, she would be escorted by torchlight to a room where the Sultan waited. She wasn't allowed to speak, not even breathe too loudly, because this night could change everything. She could rise to become the mother of an emperor, or disappear into oblivion, erased from history, like she never existed. But who decided which woman would be chosen? And what ancient rules governed these midnight ceremonies? Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most secretive power games in history. Welcome to the Ottoman Harem, where nightfall didn't bring rest. It brought war. The harem was not just a place of beauty. It was a machine, a political machine. And every woman inside it was either a piece of that machine or crushed by it. The Ottoman harem, at its peak, housed anywhere from 300 to over 1,000 women. But this was no pleasure palace. It was a fortress of order, silence, and strategy. These women weren't chosen for love. They were captured, gifted, or traded, taken from across the empire. Greek villages, Slavic towns, Persian courts, even the distant steppes of Central Asia. Blonde, dark-haired, green-eyed, black-eyed. Each one brought in not for who she was, but for what she could become. And above them all stood one woman, the allied Sultan, the Sultan's mother, the true queen behind the curtain. She ruled the harem with an iron will and velvet gloves. Her word was law, sometimes feared even more than the Sultan himself. Every corner of the harem was organized by strict rank. At the bottom were the odalisques, basic servant girls, invisible to power. Then came the concubines. Above them, the gozde, the favorites, who had caught the Sultan's eye. Then Iqbal, those favored regularly. And then the cadens, official consorts. From here, one woman might rise to the most dangerous and powerful position in the harem. Hasiki Sultan, the Sultan's chosen one, the mother of his child, possibly the next Valide. And here's the part no one talks about. No one, absolutely no one, could approach the Sultan at night without being selected. There were no love letters, no stolen glances, no flirtations in the hallway. There was only one path, through the night protocol. A system so complex and secretive, it was never written down. Even the walls had ears. Spies were everywhere, planted by rival factions, other mothers, even by the Sultan himself. Because every woman in that palace had one dream, to bear a son, a prince. And in the Ottoman world, giving birth to a prince wasn't just a blessing. It was a weapon. Because if your son became the next Sultan, you became the most powerful woman in the empire. But there was a catch. Only one son could sit on the throne, which meant for your child to survive, the others had to die. Behind the silks and perfumes, the laughter and music, the Ottoman harem was a bloodless battlefield. But make no mistake, bodies fell. And it all began, every power play, every betrayal, every rise and every fall, with a single knock on the door, the sound that told one woman, "Tonight it's your turn." It always began with silence. No fanfare, no trumpet, just a whisper and a look. That's how you knew it was your night. In the harem, the night did not belong to the stars. It belonged to the chosen. Every evening, as the last prayer echoed from the blue mosque and the palace corridors dimmed to the soft glow of lanterns, a quiet ripple spread across the harem. The ritual had begun, but no one ever said her name out loud, not even the servants. Only a subtle shift in energy, a visit from the chamber mistress, a pause in the hallway, And suddenly, every other woman knew, tonight, she was the one. Rose the preparation. The chosen woman would be escorted to the bathing chambers, accompanied by 2 silent attendants. There, her transformation began. She was bathed in rose water and milk, a process that took over an hour. Her skin was gently scrubbed, oiled with ambergris and musk, fragrances believed to make the Sultan forget every other woman. Her hair was brushed with gold-plated combs, her nails painted with henna, her body adorned with the finest silk robes, delicate, translucent, intentionally sensual. But there was one rule. No jewelry, no metal, nothing sharp, nothing dangerous. Because the Sultan had learned the hard way. Not every woman entered that room with good intentions. Candle the walk. When she was ready, 2 eunuchs arrived, each holding a brass lantern. The walk to the Sultan's chambers was only a few hundred steps, but it felt like crossing a battlefield. She was not allowed to speak, not even to meet their eyes. She walked barefoot, her every step echoing in the marble halls. Behind her, whispers stirred. Women watched from the shadows, some envious, some afraid, some already planning what to do if she didn't return. Locked with key the Chamber of Secrets. At the end of the hallway stood a pair of ornate doors. The Hazoda, the Sultan's private chamber. Here, only 2 people were allowed entry, the Sultan and his guest. Inside, the room was dim, only oil lamps flickered. A single low couch stood in the center, draped in furs and cushions. Incense curled through the air. A bowl of pomegranates. A carafe of sherbet. Nothing excessive, but every object chosen with intention. And yet, despite the beauty, the tension was suffocating. Because once she stepped inside, the doors closed behind her. From that moment on, no one knew what happened. No records. No guards. Just 2 people and centuries of ritual. She could speak only if spoken to. She could move only when allowed. Even her gaze had to be careful. Too bold, and she'd be labeled arrogant. Too meek, and she'd be forgotten. Some women said the Sultan tested them. Others said he remained completely silent. There were even whispers that certain sultans used the night to interrogate their lovers, probing for secrets or signs of betrayal. But the ultimate outcome was always the same. If he was pleased, he would send her away with a silk sash, a sign of favor. If she was exceptional, she might be summoned again. And if not, she was never called upon again. One night, one woman, and sometimes one child. That was all it took to shift the balance of the empire. Inside the harem, power was never loud. It was quiet, hidden behind veils, behind glances, behind rules that no one dared to break. And at the center of it all was silence. Shushing faced the law of silence. No matter what happened inside the Sultan's chamber, whether it was love, disappointment, or something darker, she could never speak of it. Ever. Not to the other women. Not to her attendants. Not even to her closest friend. This wasn't just tradition. It was law. Ottoman imperial law. Breaking it could mean imprisonment or execution. Because what happened between a woman and the Sultan wasn't just private, it was state business. To speak of that night was to risk the Sultan's image and the future of the empire. That's why even among hundreds of women, no one truly knew who the Sultan favored the most. They only guessed, by observing subtle changes. A new set of jewelry, a private garden, a chamber closer to the Sultan's wing. But the biggest sign was when she stopped walking with the rest of them, because she didn't have to anymore. Drop of blood the responsibility. But being favored wasn't reward. It was a burden, because with favor came a terrifying possibility. What if she became pregnant? In the Ottoman Empire, if you bore the Sultan a son, your life changed forever. You were now the mother of a prince, and by law, a prince could only stay with his mother. That meant you'd be sent away to a distant province with a small court and your child. You lived in isolation, always under watch. You raised your son knowing, one day, he may become Sultan, but only if his brothers didn't survive. Because when the Sultan died, only one son could claim the throne, and that meant all the others had to die. By strangulation, with a silk cord, a method considered bloodless, but no less brutal. So when a woman felt life stir in her belly, It wasn't always joy she felt. Sometimes it was dread. The watchers. Even before she gave birth, she was watched constantly. By midwives, by other concubines, by spies planted by the Valide Sultan herself. Because in the harem, no pregnancy was ever truly private. Some never made it full term. Some ended suddenly. And some disappeared entirely, along with the mother. Because if your son was seen as a threat, you might vanish before he ever took his first breath. In a world ruled by men, these women played the deadliest game. And the stakes? Life, death, and legacy. History is written by men, but the most dangerous events in the Ottoman palace, they were never written down. The nights no one dared record. Not every visit to the Sultan's chamber was planned. Not every guest was chosen through ritual. And not every night ended with silk and safety. Some nights were erased. There were whispers of unofficial summons, when the Sultan would call for a woman not approved by the Valide Sultan, bypassing protocol, bypassing law. It was rare, risky, forbidden. And those women, they often disappeared the next morning, either exalted in secret or removed. The archives are full of clean records. But ask the old eunuchs, the aging servants, the forgotten concubines. They'll tell you. Some nights never made it into the scrolls. Whispers of magic and manipulation. There were rumors of women who used more than charm to be chosen. Some carried amulets hidden in their robes, blessed by mystics from Persia. Some drank elixirs meant to heighten their beauty, or infusions that made their touch addictive. One story tells of a Circassian girl who learned old magic from a palace laundress. She allegedly used threads of her own hair, woven into the Sultan's pillow, to bind his dreams to her image. It worked, for a while, until the Valide Sultan found out. The girl was never seen again. Magic was outlawed in the empire, but in the harem, desperation made women do dangerous things. The fatal nights. Not all women entered that chamber with love in their hearts. There was a case, never officially confirmed, of a concubine who smuggled a poison-tipped hairpin into the Sultan's room. She had lost 2 sisters to the harem's rivalries, and her heart burned with revenge. But before she could act, a eunuch discovered the pin hidden in the folds of her sash. She was executed quietly. No trial, no burial. She wasn't just punished. She was deleted. In another tale, a rival woman was found dead the morning after being chosen, a single scratch on her neck. The Sultan was never questioned. No one ever asked, because sometimes, even the ruler was afraid of the women he summoned. The cost of obsession. For the women who did rise, for those who were chosen again and again, power came at a cost. They were watched, envied, hated. Poisoning became a silent weapon. Alliances were made in whispers, broken in the same breath. Even servants were bribed to slip powders into sherbet, or oils into bathwater. One wrong cup, and history would shift. The harem was quiet, elegant, controlled. But beneath the perfume and protocol, it was a war zone made of velvet and venom. And in its darkest hours, even silence couldn't protect you. In the history books, they are barely mentioned. No titles, no thrones, no statues. And yet these women ruled the night. The power behind the veil. The Ottoman Empire was one of the most powerful empires in human history, stretching across continents, dominating trade, war, and politics for over 600 years. But behind the military conquests, the diplomacy, and the grand strategy, there was another empire, hidden deep inside Topkapi Palace. An empire made of whispers, of eyes behind lattice windows, of footsteps on cold marble in the dead of night. And it was ruled, not by sultans, but by women. Women who had no armies, no swords, no voice in court, but who learned to survive in a system built to consume them. And not just survive, but to manipulate it from within. They used what they had, beauty, intelligence, silence, timing. And in doing so, they shaped dynasties, from captives to queens. Most of these women came to the palace as slaves, taken as children, sold by traders, or gifted by foreign dignitaries, stripped of names, homes, and families. But the Ottoman harem was not a prison in the way we imagine. It was a ladder, A brutal, narrow, dangerous ladder. But for those clever and lucky enough to climb it, the rewards were staggering. Some became Hasiki sultans, wielding more influence than grand viziers. Some bore princes who became emperors. And a few, like Harem Sultan, the legendary wife of Suleiman the Magnificent, rewrote the very rules of empire. A legacy written in silence. Their power was subtle, strategic, but it was real. A single night of favor could result in a royal birth. A single whisper could lead to a political assassination. A single alliance in the bathhouse could determine who lived and who vanished. And yet, most of these women remain anonymous. No portraits, no detailed records, no tombs with golden inscriptions. Because history doesn't reward silence. But the harem did. To survive in that world, you had to be invisible until the exact moment you no longer were. The last echoes of the harem. By the late 19th century, the Ottoman harem began to dissolve. Modernization, Western influence, and the collapse of the empire brought an end to centuries of hidden power. The velvet walls were stripped, the incense burned out, and the women who once ruled from the shadows were forgotten. But their legacy lingers in the architecture, in the laws that changed for them, in the bloodlines of emperors who would not have existed without them. They didn't fight with swords. They fought with silence, with patience, with timing. And that is far more terrifying. So the next time you see a palace, don't just look for the king's throne. Look for the shadows behind it. Because sometimes the most powerful stories belong to the ones who weren't allowed to speak at all.